Welcome to Water Bottle Sessions. My name is Omar Fawzi, and I'm going to be your host for this podcast. A little bit about myself. I completed my master's degree in counseling psychology and later on completed my PhD in counselor education and supervision. Throughout my journey, I've had the opportunity to provide counseling services for the past 7 years. I have been able to teach for approximately 4 years in a master's program for students that are interested in counseling. And I've gotten to meet a lot of different people. Throughout this, I've learned the importance of perspective. I've learned the importance of being open-minded enough to create a space for people to share their opinions and perspectives. I'm really hoping that you'll go on this journey as we create this space for different peoples from different walks of life to share their opinions, to talk about their experiences, and how they ended up being who they are today. As I said, this is just simply a passion project of mine. I'm not going to be doing counseling. There's not going to be anything therapeutic in the traditional sense. However, if we can implore critical thinking, if we could show each other a little bit of empathy, and if we could just be willing to hear someone else's story, maybe we'll understand each other just a little bit more and be able to just explore new ideas and gain perspective from each other. So I hope you'll join me. And regardless of the platform in which you're listening to this, I hope you follow, I hope you subscribe, and please feel free to comment with ideas and different perspectives of your own. If you need to reach out, it's waterbottlesessions@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you, and I hope we all engage together as we go along this journey and listen to all these different stories. Thank you. Today we continue our conversation from a previous episode with Sabrina V. Some of the things that we expand on include mental health. We talk a little bit more about her personal experiences and growing up in New York and moving a little bit around the U.S., her identity, how she became the person who she is and continues to evolve and grow. And then we pose just an open-ended discussion regarding the idea of forgiveness. I really hope you enjoy and stick around for future episodes. Thanks. All right, Sabrina, so we did part one.
Yes, we did.
Things came up. We had to end the episode early and abruptly, and we're just going to pick it up, but we don't necessarily have to follow the train of thought. But
Okay.
I will say this. Continue with your story.
Okay. Continue with my story.
Go wherever you want to go. Repeat whatever you want to repeat. Do whatever you want to do. Say whatever you want to say.
Wow. Okay. What I did realize after our last conversation was that I talked a lot about what happened after grad school, my experiencing of transitioning here to Maryland, meeting everyone that I know, getting into the field, things like that, but didn't really talk much about my childhood. And I was just like, I just went blank. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced that, but that's what happened.
What happens? I mean, have you ever done this before? Like a podcast type of thing?
No, it's my first time.
Exactly. You come in here and plus it's not like I give anyone much direction.
Right.
All I tell you, try not to out anyone. Don't talk about anyone else's name, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And all I'm going to say is tell me your story. That's it.
So yeah, I kind of left here thinking about that and said, wow, there are things that I didn't mention, which like growing up in the city and what that was like for me, specifically East Harlem, whoop, whoop.
Nice shout out.
Growing up in Manhattan, having the experience of growing in a multicultural neighborhood. We talked about last time we met, African Americans and Puerto Ricans united in that environment. But also there was a big influx of Central Americans and South Americans to the neighborhood once I was in high school. So that kind of changed the dynamic of our experience. But I think just the idea of how music really played a role in being able to overcome a lot of the things that I've been through. Last time we spoke, we talked about childhood adverse experiences. And for me, like growing up within, I guess, essentially the system, being exposed to social work at a very young age, where kind of impacted my view on the field initially, right?
Right.
Having that experience and growing up in a low income neighborhood for me was just like, how do I get out? And the only way I was told that I could get out was through education. So that's why I focused on education the last time we spoke, because it has been a big piece of my life.
Now, let me take you back a minute. So East Harlem, right?
East Harlem.
Can you give us context of years?
That I lived there?
Yeah, like what the years that you lived in East Harlem, like 1990?
Oh, yes. 91, basically to 2013.
Is that when you came here?
No, I came in 2015.
Oh, okay. So 2000 or 1991 to 2013.
Yep.
What was East Harlem like?
Well, I think growing up, it was more, I would say you could tell it was Spanish Harlem is what it's called, where everywhere you went to in every bodega, everyone spoke Spanish. There's always salsa music playing from the bodega inside. It's like a party in there. You have the flags everywhere. And just it felt like everyone was your family. You would go down to the corner store and literally, it's like you would see your uncle there and your neighbor and people that you went to school with and whatever, but everyone felt like family.
That's awesome. And was it generally, when you say Spanish Harlem?
Yes.
Now you said a lot of Puerto Ricans.
A lot of Puerto Ricans. I mean, that's why it essentially was called Spanish Harlem. They have El Museo del Barrio, which is a museum that talks about the history of that neighborhood, specifically Puerto Ricans' like migration to that neighborhood. And it's well known even on the island as Spanish Harlem. And, that's where Puerto Ricans go.
That's awesome. And the Spanish part.
Yes.
Generally Puerto Rican, but you also had Central Americans and other.
Later, and I would say early to mid 2000s is when that increase of Central Americans, and South Americans, so Ecuadorians, Mexicans, and Salvadorians to the neighborhood. To initially for us being the ones that were living there, it felt like, who are these new people? Because it was like you're encroaching in our space, but not realizing the history of New York. Essentially, that's always been the case. There's always a turnover of a new community in different parts of the city. And that Spanish Harlem, prior to Puerto Ricans living there, actually was very full of Italians.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
So Italians essentially were in the neighborhood for many years when they first migrated to New York City. And then World War I, then Puerto Ricans moved into the neighborhood, Spanish Harlem specifically. Because of racism and prejudice, Italians decide to move to the outer boroughs like Brooklyn and the Bronx, and Puerto Ricans stood in Manhattan, in Spanish Harlem. But also, yet again, another turnover, and then Puerto Ricans started moving to the Bronx or New Jersey, other areas in and out of the city.
See, that's the history in New York I know is basically early 70s onwards, specifically the Bronx, because of the birth of hip hop.
Right.
And starting with Africa Bambaataa and fast forward,
And I remember growing up listening to, it's so crazy. I think we talked about it the last time. My uncles would play, because they would listen to hip hop. I remember listening to Tupac at 8 years old and just bumping it on a cassette. And I was like, this is awesome. I remember the song Changes, and that was just, main hit. But also listening to disco and listening to freestyle music and listening to dancing music and seeing my uncles breakdance in the living room and just being like, I want to do that too. But yeah, those are the memories, the good memories that I have of my childhood.
And when you were in Spanish Harlem and it was majority Puerto Rican.
Yes.
What was that like for you regarding the difference between how America is portrayed as an individualistic society and then having the opportunity to go to any bodega, as you said, and running into your uncle, and it seems like everyone knew everyone.
Correct. It felt very collectivist, actually, where it was just everyone has each other's back. And regardless of where you went, you were being watched too. So you had to be smart.
Yeah. Anything you could do, you're going to get found out.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when there's multi-generations in the same neighborhood. So my grandmother, when she first came from Puerto Rico, resided in this area. Yeah, she went back and forth between living on the island and living in the city, but she always went back to this area. So everyone knew her. And so literally it's like, oh, you're daughter of so-and-so. So yet again, you need to know, be strategic.
Right. If you want to get away with any kind of bullshit, you got to think it twice.
Right, absolutely.
So let me ask you this. Last episode, we talked about the Afro-Latina part.
Yes.
Tie that into what did Spanish Harlem look like regarding the Puerto Ricans?
Oh, well, Puerto Ricans look like me. And so, in meaning that they were of olive brown, maybe light. Sometimes you would see a Puerto Rican that was like very fair skin, but for the most part, everyone was of olive and darker tones. So to me, it was normal that if I saw someone down the street that looked like me that was speaking Spanish, they could be African American that just learned Spanish by being around,
Right.
us. Or it was like that person was Puerto Rican, but no one would question it. It was just like, oh, okay, you're part of the community. Never any question. There was a clear division in terms of the neighborhoods, right? Like I'm talking about Spanish Harlem, which is anyone that's from the city, maybe listening to the podcast or knows Manhattan. It's 96th Street on the east side up to 125th Street. So a series of blocks where it's like, okay, this is considered Spanish Harlem. But above 125th Street and into like 160 something street, it's Harlem, meaning like Black Harlem. And, there is where you see all this history above Malcolm X, the Audubon, all these important places like the Apollo. That's where you would find those center areas.
And what was it like, the two communities being so close to each other with just maybe an intersection separating them?
Yeah. There was a lot of like merging, bleeding over, whatever, but it was never... You knew that if you went more uptown, like it's just a different feel because everyone was speaking English, but it didn't feel like we were different from each other per se because we were always together. Yeah. I just remember like admiring that in Harlem, above, like Black Harlem is what I'm talking about, African American Harlem. There were the brownstones, and that's not something that's common in Spanish Harlem.
Like the brownstones, like you're talking about higher SES living, if you will, even if it was in a neighborhood that is
right. Yeah, like the walk up tenement buildings,
right.
Which you don't really see in Spanish Harlem. You see a lot more low income, like projects, things like that.
Now, all this is coming from your perspective.
Correct.
This is not not New York historians.
Not at all. It's all what I've learned, along the way.
So you're born in the U.S. Mm-hmm. You're born in Spanish Harlem, mm-hmm. and then you move out to this area.
I do.
What was that like? I'm just touching back in the whole individual collectivistic part.
Right.
Because both of us share one thing. Mm-hmm. We both grew up in a very collectivistic culture mm-hmm. where basically wherever you go, wherever you do, mm-hmm. even the strangers that are not related to you will look out for you.
Yes.
And there is that, I guess hierarchy is the best way to describe it regarding age. Mm-hmm. So if you're the adult in the room and you see a little kid that even wants candy or a bag of chips or whatever, you just buy it for him. Mm-hmm. No questions asked. Mm-hmm. What was it like coming out here? Was there a difference? What did you notice?
Well, before I even made it out here, I went away to school, like upstate New York. Not too much upstate, but, it's outside of the city. So anything outside of the city is upstate in New York. And that community on the campus was predominantly Caucasian. And so that initial exposure, granted, New York City is a melting pot, and that's what I was used to, seeing people from all different backgrounds and languages and, things like that. But to go to live in a place, in a setting when there's only people of one community that's different from mine, that is not so collectivist.
Right.
That's where I got my initial culture shock, I believe, because you felt just so out of place, like a fish out of water. And clearly as the very few Black and brown students on campus, you didn't feel necessarily that you fit in. So that was my initial exposure to, okay, it's not like, Spanish Harlem is not everywhere else. And I did that like purposefully. I wanted to experience something different, push myself out of my comfort zone.
It takes some balls. Or whatever.
Or whatever. Or ovaries,
It takes some ovaries, some strong ovaries. So the initial culture shock, was it skin tone?
No, the initial culture shock was, there was just a lack of understanding between the different communities. Like, I mean, I remember like a friend of mine was playing Hispanic music, like salsa, whatever, and her roommate was Caucasian. Her roommate, instead of coming to speak to my friend directly and said, hey, turn down the music, or at certain hours, can you just take into consideration that, I may not want to hear this music at that time. Instead, the roommate went to go speak to the resident assistant on the floor and like kind of reported in and saying, hey, this is an issue. I don't want to live in this room anymore, and cause a bigger deal. That's like unheard of in our community. Like if you have an issue with someone, you just go straight to their face and say, hey, what's up? This is the deal.
Yeah.
And that to me was the initial like, oh, this is different.
Wow. Mm-hmm. What was that like for you, knowing that, all right, you're not in Kansas anymore?
Yeah. I was a little depressed at first. I was really excited about it initially. And then when I realized I wasn't in Kansas, I got really sad. I was just like, dang, now I have to create this new community here, which I did actually with the resident assistant community, because I became a resident assistant my sophomore year.
Did you play salsa all the time? Anytime a white girl came to complain?
I would. And because I was the resident assistant of the building, like, what could they do? But
it's Despacito on repeat before the song came out.
Oh my God. But before I was able to do that, it was really starting with the community I began college with. I entered into, it's called Equal Opportunity Program. So inner city students were given like scholarships to go away to these private schools. You would do like a pre-summer course prior to freshman year. So you kind of entered into the college with your group. So that helped a little bit. But then, you start your freshman year and now you're in a pool of thousands of students. That group that you initially started with, they're doing their own thing and they're also trying to find their way. So
it's incredible if you think about starting a group like that or being a part of a group that is trying to keep you together.
Correct. So it's like you don't get lost in the...
But also might have been taken away the opportunity for you to experience what you experienced with your roommate. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like, I'm not judging Spanish Harlem as good or bad. That was your experience. Mm-hmm. But it becomes one tone if you never leave.
Correct.
You'll never understand that there are people out there that may not feel comfortable simply saying, can you turn down the music? I'm just trying to study. Mm-hmm. And it's a completely reasonable thing.
Right.
But they just may be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And theorizing why is unnecessary.
Oh, I can tell you why. We've had...
Oh. Then tell us why. Just don't say her name.
There were plenty of incidents that freshman year across the board for our class, actually. Yeah, we were very expressive students.
What do you mean?
Well, I just think back to who I was when I first started college. I was very loud, not caring, no consideration for how others felt. But that's the neighborhood and the family I grew up in. We just straight shooters, tell you how we feel. If we hurt your feelings, so be it. Mm-hmm. In a good or bad way, right? Like it could be very damaging. Right. But that's what I was used to. So I came into college, this new environment, acting the same way. And so thankfully I did not get expelled or have any like physical altercations.
So you were loud. I'm going to speak my mind, say whatever the hell I want to say.
I don't care.
Whenever,
I'll curse you out if I have to. Like, does not matter. And if we're going to fight kind of thing.
Yeah.
I realized very quickly, though, that there are other ways to communicate your emotions other than getting physical or being like verbally aggressive towards someone. Literally, that was like my growing pains in college of then becoming who I am today. Not that I'm no longer that person, right? Like
You're still Jenny from the block.
I'm still Jenny from the block with the hoops and everything.
Right.
But I'm a little more, I don't know. What is the word for it?
Refined.
There we go. But yeah, it took some growing pains. So yeah, I mean, what happened was that there was another incident where one of my other friends had an issue with her roommates. And she was like, can you sit in this meeting with me? You're so good about communicating your feelings and thoughts. And I'm like, really?
If you need someone to just sit there and yell the whole time, sure. Yeah, I'll be there.
Sure. And I had no qualms. That's the problem. I did not care about what were going to be the consequences. Yet again, guys, learning, growing pains. I was in my early teens at that time. But what was
early teens?
Late teens, excuse me.
Gotcha.
Excuse me. I'm thinking like 19, 20, like, right. So one of the young ladies that was there shared that the reason she at the time didn't feel comfortable telling my friend that there was things that she didn't appreciate or she felt uncomfortable with was due to us being women of color and how we are perceived in the world, and how we express ourselves. Back to who I said I was and the family.
I see.
The family that I grew up with and all of that. The idea that Black women and women of color are loud and that they can be aggressive scared her. And so she said, I didn't feel comfortable initially speaking to you guys or to your, my friend, because I thought that's the response I was going to get. Yes, we do come maybe from those experiences. Maybe we could be loud and things like that, but we also are logical people and we can have a normal conversation and, be empathetic and hear someone's point of view. But it was interesting to hear that that's how we were being perceived.
Huh. So the first thing that I heard is this woman. All right, so I'm going to try to break this down.
Young adult, just like us, 20s. Mm-hmm.
Projecting. So I'm not going to say that this stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
Of white culture would be we speak like this. Mm-hmm. We're quiet.
Correct.
We are very sensible.
Mm-hmm.
We are very respectful.
Mm-hmm.
We toe the line.
Yeah.
We do not speak up to, if your voice is loud, there's always a reason for it. Mm-hmm. You don't just yell. Your voice is never too deep and it's never too high. It's just, you're always
even keel.
Extremely mindful of your surroundings, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Then you project that into that's the norm.
Yes.
Everyone, that's the way you have to be.
Right.
But if you come from a culture where you can call it loud, I call it passionate.
Correct.
You can call it aggressive, I call it vibrant. Mm-hmm. When you love something, there's a reason why when we may find a joke funny, we feel the need to get up and walk out the room and come running back in, laughing harder to walk back out.
So true.
We tie to physicality. When we're happy, our body, our mind, our voice, everything's happy.
Yes. I'm
not saying that white people are just, it's the stereotype of having a stick up their ass. That's not what I'm saying, though some of them definitely do. Mm-hmm. And same thing with minorities.
Correct.
But generally speaking, this woman was like, well, this salsa music's too loud.
Yes.
And these are women of color that are acting abnormal. Mm-hmm. And if I was to tell them something that they potentially may not want to hear,
they will be aggressive towards us.
And the reaction's only going to be more abnormal.
Correct.
So in order for me to get something across to them, I may have to just approach them. Mm-hmm. If I choose not to go to the RA, for an example, when I approach them, I'm going to approach them with my eyes wide open, and I'm going to be aggressive right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And then when they react that way, when they react to my level of aggression, I'll always stand there and say, but what the fuck did I do? I'm just matching you. It's like, no, you completely misappropriated the culture.
Yes.
When we're loud, when we are dancing, when we're singing, when we're screaming, talking over each other where no one knows what anyone's saying, to you, that may seem weird. To us, that may seem weird.
Right.
But don't make the assumption just because that this is our culture, that we're illogical, violent, aggressive people.
Which is how the people, community of color has been perceived and what has been portrayed about the community of color for so long in media and so on, that we're just like vultures.
Yeah. It's interesting if you're part of the out group. And in Spanish Harlem, you're definitely the in group.
Yeah.
So way past the expiration date of what Manhattan used to be back in the 70s and in the 80s, when it became Wall Street Manhattan, when it came rich Manhattan with the Tiffany's, and the Central Park was no longer what it used to be. And money started pouring into that area. It's interesting, the landscape of New York, of what it was, where everyone came from that. But as that changed, the new normal became Manhattan. And then, I mean, I was in New York a little before COVID started.
Okay.
And it was the third time I've ever been to Hell's Kitchen.
Wow, all the way downtown.
The first 2 times I've been to Hell's Kitchen, you kind of had to look over your shoulder a bit. You have to be very mindful when you come to a stoplight. You never, ever completely stop the car just because you never know who may be coming in the intersection.
Yeah.
Last time I was in Hell's Kitchen, whoa. Completely different landscape.
Same thing in Spanish Harlem. There's been, what is that called? I've forgot the word now for it.
Gentrification.
There we go. Thank you.
I got you all day today.
I'm like, words are missing.
It's refined gentrification. That's both words so far.
It's been a long week.
Right.
Gentrification and Spanish Harlem is not even Spanish Harlem the way we remember it. There's a lot of pieces of it that's still similar, but the pricing of housing, just the renovation of the neighborhood, which is great on one end, right? Because there was a lot of things that needed to be worked on, infrastructure, the street, everything. But then again, it's like the cultural piece is lost. The affordable food, the affordable whatever, groceries, things like that are no longer a thing.
Right. Let's break that down for a minute. So Spanish Harlem was a little more, as you said, the projects, right?
Yeah.
Not so many brownstones, but maybe apartments.
Yes, for sure.
So I am a person who's doing fairly well in my life in the 1960s and 70s. And I decided, you know what? There's this shithole in New York City. There's an apartment building that's more or less condemned. Me and my friends, we work construction or whatever. All of us are going to get together, put in our money, and buy this apartment building. And then because of the rules that are in place, we can turn it to Section 8.
Yeah.
Meaning that if the tenant can't pay, the government will. I'm collecting my rent regardless. And on top of that, all I have to do is maintain a very small amount of updates, if you want to call them updates, and upkeeps. I have to do the bare minimum to meet not the community's needs, but the Section 8 title.
Nor what they deserve.
I'm not yet. You took it a step I wasn't even yet, right. Not what they deserve, not only because they're people and human beings,
right,
but they're also trying. They have kids, they have families, but I don't want to go down that road.
Okay.
Yet. And then I start to notice, well, wait a minute, this community, they have a lot of vibrance and they have a lot of food. So that little mom and pop shop that's selling mofongo and making the empanadas and all the other meals that I don't know how to say that are really good. Now people are coming from Manhattan. They're coming from all around New York because that one bodega makes the greatest empanadas.
Right.
The other bodega, they make some incredible fill in the blank, whatever, right? And before you know it, there's money being pumped into that area.
Yes.
And there's a little bit of a buzz. And the second that the bodegas are making money, then you have the street carts. And then the bars.
Yep.
and people start hanging out there. And now what used to be Spanish Harlem looks like a tourist destination for people like your roommate's roommate. And they come in, but they get to go out. They get to go back home.
Right, to their safe haven.
But all that money and all that taxes still coming into the community. So me and my friends who put up that Section 8 housing, that project, say, no more. We don't want the Section 8 title. So we're going to pull it. We have that ability. When we pull that, we own the land.
Yes.
In Spanish Harlem, New York City. Now I can invest in turning it around into condos and apartments and overlooking the city and blah, blah, blah. Or I could find me, I don't know, a Trump. I could find me an investor who's going to buy all this off of me because the property value is excruciatingly high. And by selling this, I've not doubled or tripled my money. It's exponentially more than whatever money I put in because society saw that area as a dump. Now they see potential. And if I wait long enough and I sell that, the second they turn into the condos, well, we're not doing Section 8. And then comes in the hipsters, comes in the whomever. Gentrification takes place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, where I grew up off of Madison Avenue, so right by Fifth Avenue, guys, by Central Park, is prime real estate because it's overlooking the park. And so there's a lot of museums from downtown coming into uptown, and also renovations, like you said, of condos, of new places to live, eat, whatever, because it's like, oh, this is the perfect area and you could get things for cheap, so on and so forth.
Next thing you know, well, if you are not lucky enough, there's a lot of words I want to use here, but if you're somehow accidentally found yourself owning your own place, yeah, there's a reason why minorities held just in D.C. in a city called Petworth, right?
Yes.
Every month you're going to receive a letter in the mail telling you, are you ready to sell your house? Are you ready to sell your house? And then people say redlining, in the traditional sense, redlining may not exist. However, all right, so you're pushing these people out that made this neighborhood what it was. And you're putting so much pressure on them in trying to buy their mortgages, trying to figure out how to get them out of that area, and you're switching it up. Where are these people going?
That's the thing.
Right.
A lot of them are moving to the suburbs, whatever that means, because I don't even think that exists anymore. It used to be Queens in New York, where you can like buy a home and still feel like you're in the city. In the Bronx also has been a lot of gentrification. So, and Brooklyn is no longer Brooklyn or Crooklyn anymore. It's hipster city. And so people are now just moving to Jersey or moving to Philadelphia, moving just wherever, everywhere outside of New York.
Now, I noticed last time I was there, it's not a wake-up call, but I mean, the city still completely smells like piss.
Oh, yes.
No offense to New Yorkers.
I've been there recently. I was like, oh, my God. I used to, like, live here.
No, I know. I remember going to Brooklyn. I don't remember where in Brooklyn it was, but it was like a 5 square block, something. I don't know. Like, there's just a square where I felt like I left the United States and entered Egypt in Brooklyn. And I remember thinking in my head, like, holy shit, I'm smelling smells that I've never smelled in this country before. And if there's one thing, you can change architecture. We've seen it in Vegas, for an example. You could change architecture to make it look whatever the hell you want. If you have money, you could do it. You can put whatever restaurants you want. But when you're walking in that area in Brooklyn at 8:30 in the morning and there are no shops open and the smell in the street smells like a different country, that community has really settled in. And then last time I was in New York, that area doesn't exist anymore. And that was like, the hell, it's not even been 10 years. Like,
right.
And then you look around and everything is not just a 7-Eleven. So forget bodega. It's not just a 7-Eleven, but it's a 7-Eleven with the nice microwaves. And you're thinking in your head, who the hell can afford to pay $7 for an Italian sub that 6 you know,
Yep.
just different.
Totally different. And I think earlier you asked me, how did it feel to move out here? So
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. My initial transition to not being in Kansas anymore was college. But then moving out here after grad school, I realized I really wasn't in Kansas, because then another level or, I don't know, experience of culture shock of coming into live in a community where no one looks like me, or they do, but they just identify different, right? So moving to the Maryland, DC area, it's very heavy populated with Central and South Americans. And I remember in starting to meet with clients, or even just going to the supermarkets and engaging with the cashiers and speaking the same language, essentially. Different dialects, different words, whatever, but it's the same language. I would get those confused faces, and I'd be like, why are they confused? Like, what is happening? And they'd be like, you speak Spanish? And I'm like, yes. Like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
And they're like, you don't look like us, and you're brown, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they could be brown too. That was the confusing part to me initially, because I knew it was clear, and it happens within the Puerto Rican community, especially on the island. There is prevalent colorism, but I just had not experienced it with any other Hispanic outside of the Puerto Rican community. And so to see that whomever I was engaging with at the time was a woman, and she was just so confused, was asking me where am I from, and were my parents both Puerto Rican? I guess that was going to give me brownie points or whatever. And she's like, wow, and you speak really good Spanish, because also there is this view on Puerto Ricans that we can't speak proper Spanish, which, I mean, there's some truth to it.
It's okay if it's true.
Right. I'm like, that is the case at times, but I did learn proper Spanish in school. And so all around, it was just confusing to her and to me to be received that way, but also for her to be confronted with someone that looked totally different from her.
You know, going back to what you said about in Puerto Rico on the island and dialectics.
Yeah.
The whole concept that, so we'll start with Spanish.
Yes.
A language I don't speak.
Mm-hmm.
But a little knowledge of history, right? So Columbus or Cortez or whomever makes their way to a little island or a group of islands.
Group of islands, yes.
And destroy it, demolish it.
Mm-hmm. Indigenous people gone.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing them with them, Africans.
Yes.
Bringing them with them, whoever they need to bring with them to do the work that needed to be done for them to claim this land as their own or whatever.
Right.
And we'll fast forward that part.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, because they came from Spain, it then became Spanish, is that mother tongue.
Right. And specifically Castilian
That's what I was getting at.
Spanish.
I was
Correct.
going to say Catalan, and I realized that's not it at all. Isn't that Barcelona?
Something like that. I don't know.
Doesn't matter. Castilian Spanish. That's the proper Spanish.
Yes.
And then last I heard, the fight was between Cubans and Puerto Ricans on whose Spanish is worse.
Honestly,
Maybe you don't.
I don't think
share your
anyone
opinion.
wins.
Right. What's interesting is it's considered good or bad, but all in opposite or all in reference to that Castilian Spanish.
Right, because like we were talking about, when it comes to the colorism that has been entrenched into our community and in the mindset, right? It is seen across the board, Central, Caribbean, and South American individuals, that the closest you are genetically to looking and speaking like a Spaniard or Portuguese individual, because there was a lot of Portuguese individuals that came as well with the Spaniards, then you are of purebred. You are more Latino, whatever that means.
Right.
And I find the fight is really more so in the South American community with Uruguayans, Colombians, and Argentinians, I believe, and everyone else in that, area of you don't speak proper Spanish and who speaks proper Spanish and
Right.
what does that mean and all of these things.
It's interesting. I don't speak Spanish. I don't speak Italian. I don't speak any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, history.
Mm-hmm.
A big group. There's a reason why Argentinians kind of look the way they do,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm definitely not talking about indigenous Argentinians at all.
Yes.
Is a migration from Italy, like a big one, and then from the people that I do know that do speak Spanish,
Yes.
they refer to the type of Spanish Argentinians speak as almost musical,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got like a, I don't know,
Like a rhythm to it. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit different,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a bit faster.
Yes.
And then I think, well, how do you speak Italian?
Same.
Doesn't it also have a rhythm? Doesn't it all? Again, I don't know. I don't speak Italian,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want people to get bogged up on the details of this. But in understanding that history did play a role,
Correct.
it's interesting that now it's 2020, and instead of saying, "Hey, Cubans speak Cuban Spanish," I mean, yes, it's all Spanish. We'll all call it Spanish. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's my dialect.
Yes.
It's fine. Like Cuban dialect is fair.
Mm-hmm.
Puerto Rican's fair. Argentinian's fair. So be it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still that subconscious desire to say, but there's always going to be better because it's not Castilian.
Mm-hmm.
And
ultimately, you're not more European in descent.
And now going back to Puerto Rico, the island.
Yes.
And the differences that exist within the island itself and your experiences, of course.
Absolutely. Yes.
Interesting how maybe a fair-colored Puerto Rican individual
Mm-hmm.
might migrate and have an accent
Mm-hmm.
and live here in the United States and consider themselves, still maintains that same mentality coming from that island that I am better than
Yes.
and I am more important than somebody else. So when I come to this country, I will identify with the other majorities.
Yes. Because you can.
Yeah. And it applies in every single culture.
Yes.
Like there's no culture, there's no immigrant
Mm-hmm.
that comes from across that did not experience some kind of privilege in their homeland
Mm-hmm.
and then come in here, and whether it's understanding and negotiating or it breaks you and you realize that, if you're immigrating to this country from, I don't know, the Congo
Mm-hmm.
or Nigeria or Kenya, it's a lot harder to hide
Right.
behind an accent
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't matter where you walk, it doesn't matter what you do, that brownness, the melanin in your skin, because you were born in a physical location in the world, will dictate how people are going to approach you.
Right.
Versus in Puerto Rico, from my understanding,
Mm-hmm.
there are people who are very much lighter than I am
Mm-hmm.
and will come here and maximize that opportunity, even if they're doing it subconsciously. I'm not claiming that everyone's racist all the time or meaning to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just fascinating to see some of those subconscious like traits
Right. Right.
come up no different than your roommate
Mm-hmm.
who went to the RA versus you,
Yes. Yes.
There is a potential connection, if anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So back to your story.
Yes. So that's funny. Now I'm thinking about like visiting the island when I was growing up with family. Every summer we would go to Puerto Rico, and I loved it because, I mean, you're on an island. It's beautiful. You're always at the beach. Everyone's always eating, and you can eat things that are grown in the backyard. It's awesome. But I learned very early on, though, that I was different, even on the island. My story specifically of, first off, they know that you were not born on the island just based on how you speak and how you carry yourself. I had no idea of this when I was like 8 years old, which was like the first time I went to Puerto Rico.
Right.
But they were like, yeah, you dress differently. I was like, oh, okay, so that's how I stand out. But not only do you dress differently, how you carry yourself, your mannerisms, then how do you speak Spanish is also different. There's a certain like sound to how Puerto Ricans speak Spanish as well. Makes it particular to the community. And so that's how they knew also that I wasn't born on the island.
Yeah.
And I found that oftentimes my cousins would be like, oh yeah, la gringa. And I'd be like, la gringa? Like, I'm not a white person.
Right.
Like, what's happening? They're like, no, but you're American. And yes, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. We understand. We're a Commonwealth. We understand. But a lot of people on the island do not identify as Americans because there's a lot of privileges, but a lot of restrictions as well on living on the island, like not being able to vote and things like that.
Right.
So I found that even within the community, I was like, dang, I don't fit on the island as a like true Puerto Rican. And even on the island, they'd be like, you're really dark. So maybe you came from this side of the island. There's a place called Loíza, which is very known. It was an African port for the Spanish conquistadores in the slave trade. And so a lot of people would ask, like, do you have family that's from that part of the island? Or did your family come from like San Juan or Ponce, where there was a lot of like more Spaniard like location or people staying? So I found that was my experience, but I learned a lot about what it meant to be Puerto Rican and our history by visiting every summer. But then coming back to New York City, then I'd be like, okay, so then are they not really Puerto Rican? And what does that mean? Like creating this new identity of Puerto Ricanness, growing up in the city and being like, well, we represent the community, but the community itself doesn't want to be represented by us. A lot of people from the island would talk about that they felt like New Yorkers were not well versed in the history of Puerto Rico and where we came from and what it means to be Puerto Rican. They actually said that I would hear a lot that Puerto Ricans, New Yorkers specifically, they were seen like we were looked down upon by individuals that were from Puerto Rico, the island, because we were making fools of ourselves, trying to represent a flag that we know nothing about, the history of.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, in some ways, there was a lot of truth in what was being said, because nowhere else in New York City do you hear about the Puerto Rican history other than in your home. And if your family is 1 or 2 generations removed from people that lived on the island, they may not even have that history. So there's truth in that, in what was being said, but to feel like, damn, even in your own community, you're not even accepted, like you're not Puerto Rican enough.
I say wow, not necessarily because it's a good or bad thing. It's just it doesn't matter what culture you go to. It doesn't matter where you travel in the world. There's always going to be an in-group. Mm-hmm. And there's always going to be the in-group that considers the foundation. Mm-hmm. We are the foundation to judge every other aspect.
Yes.
We are the people that are going to say, this is what Puerto Rico is. Mm-hmm. This is what Puerto Rico means. Mm-hmm. This is the type of Spanish, the way you carry yourself, the clothes you wear, everything. Mm-hmm. And then as we've decided that we are that foundation, mm-hmm. we get to choose the other.
Correct.
We now get to, going back to Chris's episode, mm-hmm. we get to choose who's in the bubble and who's out of the bubble and who's allowed to have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating because then when you're going to Puerto Rico once a summer.
Yes.
Or every summer or whatever it was, you're also coming back to Spanish Harlem and almost experiencing an identity crisis of sorts. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you negotiate? Like, how did you deal with that?
I think what I recall was I was excited to go back and speak to my friends about what I learned about our quote unquote history.
Were your friends Puerto Rican?
Yes. But they also were on the full spectrum of color, of skin complexions, of what a Latino person would look like or a Puerto Rican would look like. And so I was excited to go back and be like, hey, so I learned this, I learned that. Had no idea. It wasn't something I was hearing at home. It was literally from family that lived on the island. And I think it was me doing a lot of my own research. There wasn't a lot of information like passed down on to me from generations beforehand about our family history or specifically the cultural history.
Right.
So I don't know. I just learned along the way about, okay, there's African roots here. I hear that there was this port, blah, blah, blah. What does that mean? And I did my history and realized that there's actually celebration of that on the island. Although there are some people that look down on individuals that are of color, darker skin tone, on the island, but that there it's embraced, like it's called, these dances are called bomba and plena, and that there is like full garment and like whatever clothing that goes with that celebration, and people like revel in that. And so to me, I was like, wow, like I feel very proud.
You found that cultural identity.
I did, where I had not experienced it prior, where I thought, oh, okay, well, I don't even exist in this community in a sense, you know.
It's you found your own footing.
Mm-hmm.
You had to go through a little bit of hell and back and a lot of personal negotiation. Mm-hmm. And that's just regarding your cultural identity, and without going any further than what you want to go, also facing childhood adversity at the same end.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
Yes, it is a lot. And it's taken, even I'm still negotiating till this day, right? And still trying to figure out how I identify at different phases of life. But yeah, for me, it was just a lot of research that I did. And like listening to a lot of music and realizing that a lot of the artists were actually Latinos, but Latinos of African descent, and that how we respect and we admire these individuals on a entertainment platform, but then within our community, in a lot of different Latino backgrounds, right, ethnicities, we look down on the community of color.
Right.
So I was just like, that's crazy. Like, how do we do this? That's interesting. Even the dancing, like, yeah.
You're talking,
just like,
I mean,
whoa.
you could see that, and we have seen it played out historically and today with what used to be underground culture in any kind of genre of music. Pick one. It used to be underground.
Right.
All right. So house
even food.
Everything.
Yeah, I'm like, I know that's like
everything. House music. Believe it or not, the whole like boom, boom, like that kind of, like the house music that's kind of repetitive, whatever. That started in a black bar in the 70s. So house music started in a black bar underground in the 70s. And now it's played on a huge platform in Miami to a sea of white people. To me, music, a lot of things they transcend gender. It's a human thing. Right. Music that's my projection onto it, at least. But it's just interesting to see that whatever can start out as being something that is very personal, depending on what we're talking about, it does take a life of its own.
Yes.
And you could point fingers, you could point blame, but look at hip hop.
Yes.
How many court hearings were held against NWA, against all these people? Hell, even Twisted Sister had to go through her own shit, and that's just that is a white rock band. People in an in-group get to decide, and if it's not okay, then you'll have the other will come out and say, oh, this is not okay according to people we don't like. Let's make it popular. And then it becomes kind of desensitized. Watching that whole process in an objective way with you have no dog in the fight. You're just watching things happen.
Right.
And the more observant that I just continue to look around what I see in front of me, it's like, dude, have you not seen the pattern yet?
I always wonder, though, or I guess I've come to be wondering about what is the point of extreme, though. And what I mean by that is that I find that now, today, the world we live in, it's so easy to cancel somebody. It's so easy to call out cultural appropriation. And yes, I think in a lot of moments, times, incidents, whatever, that has occurred. But then when do we embrace the fact that maybe someone is just admiring, enjoying in the beautiful culture of a community and wanting to embrace it and maybe integrate it into their life Not in a negative way, but just because they really do enjoy it.
Here's what's interesting. Of course, this is all an opinion.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Spanish Harlem, but today.
Yes.
Actually, well, let's go back to Spanish Harlem when it was Spanish Harlem. But make it in 2020, like with the political climate and everything, right?
Okay.
But it's the Spanish Harlem from the 90s that you remember. And Sabrina is no longer however old you were in that time, but you are a grown woman who has a bodega, whatever.
Okay.
If I, Omar, looking the way I do, was to walk into your bodega once a week,
Yeah.
and then maybe twice a week, and I start talking to you, and you realize, oh, he doesn't speak Spanish.
Yeah.
But I tell you, like, oh my God, your food's fucking incredible. It's like wow. And I'm bringing friends also that look like me. It's interesting. I find, in my experience, whenever I travel or go anywhere that is minority owned or majority owned, doors are open. I get in and they do not perceive me as someone who's gentrifying anything.
No, they would be like, let's let him in. Your family.
Right. It's interesting, though, if I was a white guy.
Yes.
It is way different for them. They experience a whole, like, this shit again. They experience that kind of welcome. And I've seen it with my own eyes sitting down in restaurants that are from my own cultural background to sitting down and just, hell, forget even culture. You're sitting down at your home bar in your local neighborhood that you go to every single Wednesday.
Okay.
Maybe that bar's Town Tavern. I don't know. And the second that someone comes in that doesn't usually come in, that's dressed a little bit different, maybe they're wearing salmon shorts. I don't know. Maybe their polo's up. I have no clue. And maybe they have a hat that's not quite on right or on at all with glasses facing backwards. I don't know who I'm trying to describe.
Oh, not at all.
Regardless if they come from Georgetown or not. That person will walk in and I could guarantee.
Yeah, there would be an automatic reaction.
Everybody would be like, who the hell's this guy?
Yes. And I've seen it in my community.
Right.
The minute it's like, what?
We are guilty of the same things we accuse the other.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that gets enough attention because what we want to do, and by we, I'm not saying minorities,
right,
human beings,
yes,
is say, sure. But that person's also doing this.
Yes.
Can't control the other person. What about your own actions? Where does that accountability begin and end for you? This is your life.
Right.
I think there's a lot that we just said. Then we don't need to break it down because we're assuming if anyone's listening, they can come up with this shit for themselves, you know?
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating thing to watch. It's so much easier for me as a white guy, as a black guy, as an Asian guy, as a Puerto Rican man, woman, whatever, whichever way you identify yourself. Anytime I feel insecure, I will say, damn you. Not what is the cause of my insecurity. Right. And don't get me wrong, there are times. Look at trans community or the queer community or the lesbian, gay, the LGBTQ plus community. Consistently identified and judged if it's a parade or if it's this or if it's that, or like, oh my God, what you're a man, speak like a man, do this like a man.
And what does that mean?
So yeah, the person doing that to you is an asshole. Like, live and let live, buddy. People are allowed to be whoever the hell they want to be.
Right.
You're allowed to sit there and do what you're doing. Let them do what they're doing.
Well, I think it speaks back to what we were saying in the beginning with the situation with the roommate, right, at college, was that we tend to put preconceived notions and just expectations on other individuals based on the mindset, the things that we have in our brains, right? Paradigms of how this community or this person is supposed to behave. No one fits into those boxes. We want to create boxes so bad.
But it makes us feel
safe.
Good. Yeah. And I get it. Like, I'm not, believe it or not, as judgy as this may sound, it's not always a negative. You come up with this stuff to protect yourself and to also figure out where in the hell do you fit into this world?
Correct.
What box are you in? And being that this is not therapy and this is not whatever, but philosophically speaking, do you need to be in a box? But that's a question for every single individual that they have to figure out the answer for. There's no right or wrong answer to this.
Right.
But given the constructs that are not natural that we have built, right?
Yes.
And I think that deserves a little bit of focus. These constructs are not natural. They are man-made.
Yes.
Or woman-made or people-made or whatever the politically correct culture
and it
would
harms
say.
our ability to like just be in relation with other people, with people.
Right.
I just wanted to comment because I had this on my mind when I was speaking about the situation with the roommates. Funny enough, in that conversation, and it talks about how this conflicts with creating relationships, she said, I wish I could be more like a woman of color.
Who said this?
The roommate's roommate.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, what do you mean by that? And she's like, I wish our community would be known to be as expressive and forthcoming as women of color are perceived. She felt like she had to stick into her box, be in her box and not be an expressive person, maybe who's at the core of who she is because of her ethnic, whatever, racial background. That causes the internal but external conflict of being in relation with self, but with others too.
That dissonance is a powerful thing.
Yeah, I was like, whoa.
What was that term in the mid-90s that people would refer to a white person who acts black? A wigga or whatever?
Something like that.
It's fascinating. It doesn't matter what snapshot of history we take. It applies today. There's a reason why if you and I were to pull up a YouTube clip of James Baldwin giving an interview in the 50s or 60s or whatever, right? That conversation, you colorize it if it's a black and white and fix up the sound and people would assume, oh, this just happened yesterday. That's a big problem. And I'm not talking about race.
Yes.
It's a human thing.
Yeah.
The hell have you learned and where are you moving? What's interesting is going back to Puerto Rico, right?
Okay.
Whether you're considered or identify as Afro,
Yes.
white, Puerto Rican, Afro-Latina, whatever it is that you fit, do you think all the people that are on an island can find common ground?
I think we can.
Could it be the island?
I think it could be the island, but I really think the common ground would be the music.
Even the music. And even, I was trying to even be more basic and more objective to that is like, all right, you're on an island. You guys are literally standing on common ground. Like literally.
Yes.
If you can find common ground with someone, build on it.
Yeah.
You can build the music. And we're all going to dance to the same rhythm, if you will. Even if we're interpreting different meanings from the lyrics. Even if we're hearing different instruments, because I like the bass and you like the drums. And he or she like the guitar and so on and so forth. And of course, the steel drums.
Yes.
And God knows what other...
Trumpets and things like that.
Reminds me of the Chappelle John Mayer skit when he goes in the barbershop. Have you seen it?
No.
It's really funny. Anyway, it's you could find common ground with people and you could learn to grow from that. But do we want to find common ground with people?
I often find that no.
Why?
Because then it makes us have to reevaluate the constructs that we've created, the boxes that we've created, and that we're more similar than we're different. And then also having to confront the fact that a lot of injustices and atrocities have been committed because of the perception of that person is someone else. It's the other, whatever. And when you come to face with that can cause, some real identity issues and psychological stuff.
You'd have to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Before I could find common ground with anyone, I have to know that I like fill in the blank. To understand that you like fill in the blank. there has to be a moment of introspection. There has to be a moment of self-identity, like figuring out who are you.
Right.
And that's not an easy process. No one said that's an easy process.
Not at all.
And I think maybe it's not the hardest step to take, but you at least have to be willing to figure that out.
Right.
If you're not willing to figure that out, it's a lot easier to force yourself to fit into common ground with other people that are like you than to extend yourself out to be like, oh, wait a minute. This is who I am. This is what I like. This is why I am that way. And I think the why is a question that never gets enough attention. Is I could sit here and be like, well, you're wearing a jean jacket, looks like a black shirt underneath. Your fingernails are red, wearing hair tie or a headband or whatever that thing's called, so on and so forth. Easy to identify because I'm just looking at you. Why? Are you wearing a coat, but people will see clearly I'm in a shirt? Well, I'm a bigger guy, so maybe I'm not getting as cold as easy as you. Is it cold in this room? You'll never know during a podcast, you know?
Right.
You're not in this room. We can make so many assumptions based on just this.
Correct.
And we could just ask.
Yes.
Yeah. So, your story and growing up in Spanish Harlem and adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
And everything that you've shared with today and previously. Taking it back to mental health. Now you're in 2020, about to be 2021. Yes. The political climate is what it is. And your caseload, if I remember it, we decided on 20.
And it's only increasing. This week it increased.
There you are. Now, something I wanted to say happened between, actually, you know what? Can we take a quick break?
Yeah.
Awesome. We took a little break.
Yes.
Now we're back. So tying in our first episode to today, it was interesting because having that gap in between the two, also some of the people that listen contacted me. And they talked about the mental health component.
Okay.
And the self-care, especially some of them know that that's what I do for a living and whatever. And I wanted to get your opinion and even expanding a little bit about everything that you talked about regarding those childhood adverse experiences, your own identity, and seeing the field of social work from the place you saw it as a recipient of the system versus now actively being a provider as part of that system. How do you negotiate your experiences, differentiate them from being exposed to, because you said this past week you even have more clients.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it? We talked about self-care, we talked about that, and that's kind of the dive that I want to go in.
Yeah.
How do you deal with all the shit that you're exposed to?
I don't know. One day at a time.
Yeah, it's a heavy question.
Doing the things I mentioned prior, but yeah, I really do try to find moments to disconnect or work on just self. I think that to me is key. That if I'm not okay in a level-headed, even keel space, of course, is going to impact the work that I do. And so I do a lot of, I guess, personal growth is what it would be, classified as, but a lot of just internal understanding, wanting to figure out how am I also navigating these issues in my own life? How have I been able to, like you said, negotiate and come to reconcile with those experiences so that it doesn't or does impact the work that I do? And I find that it's a one day at a time situation for me. It's a work in progress. There's a lot of things I've worked through, I've processed through, blah, blah, blah. But there's still things that I get stuck on that I'm still struggling with because of ego, but because of the validity of the situation of what occurred and all of it. And yeah, I think I was sharing with you in our break that what's been really heavy on my mind and heart this like past week and a half is the idea of forgiveness. And what does that mean in the context of what we talked about, right? When it came to like social injustice issues, and how we see the other community, our community, but also in our personal stories and experiences. Are we able to forgive, and what does forgiveness mean ultimately? I don't have an answer to it. But
It's $1 million question.
yes.
Forgive and forget, right?
Forgive and forget, but is that real?
Is that even possible?
Is that even possible? I don't know. I guess if you get dementia or something.
If only, right? If only.
Like
Selective dementia.
Right, exactly. On certain things.
Well, let's break it down then.
Mm-hmm.
Let's keep it at the context in what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Social injustices.
Yeah.
We'll stay there. Is it possible for the person who's had injustices onto them to forgive their abuser?
It's possible. On a logical sense. I think, yes, maybe, like I said, on a logical level, you can say, I forgive this person. I do wonder on the emotional level and mental, are you able to truly forgive and let go of that injustice, of that experience? Even if it hasn't necessarily been done onto you, but to your community. Can you forgive?
Let's play it out.
Mm-hmm.
I am your abuser,
Mm-hmm.
and you have been abused by me.
Okay.
And now we're at a crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want, we can even role play it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we can role play it in the sense of I'll ask for forgiveness, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You'll respond the way you need to respond, and we can both respond in the moment and also kind of think objectively by thinking out loud of potential things.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
This is going to get kind of weird.
Okay.
But welcome to my brain.
Welcome.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm your abuser.
Okay.
And I've abused you for, you could say, a year or millennia. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming to you now saying, hey, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Forgive me.
I can either decide to say, okay, I accept your apology and move on. I can respond as, okay, I accept your apology, but I'll never forget what had been done in the past year or millennia. Or I choose to say, I don't forgive you, and that be suffice. Or I forgive you, and I guess feeling like, I think oftentimes people get caught up in that it's not fair to give forgiveness, that in some way it's a release of power or whatever.
There is power in being a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously clearly power in being an abuser. Mm-hmm. Let me come at you a different way, though.
Okay.
What if I came to you and now I'm thinking out loud. I've not said anything to you yet. Shit. Kind of fucked up. Mm-hmm. Made some real big mistakes here. I've been victimizing Sabrina for years. Mm-hmm. Historically speaking, Sabrina has been victimized by me for years. If I admit that I made a mistake and actually stand up and look her dead in the eye and say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. My ego won't let me. So I'll tell you what. I know I got to sit down in front of Sabrina today. We're doing this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to apologize to her, but instead I'm going to give her a platform to finally say what she wants to say. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to necessarily, where I used to object and tell her to shut the fuck up and that her opinion doesn't matter and that she's wrong.
Right.
What I'm going to do is just let her speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then if she ever says, Omar, you're an asshole, I'll always have this podcast to reference that I've done okay by her in this interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And if she brings up anything prior to that,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll just tell her, but things have changed.
Yeah.
Deal with it. Like we're not going back there. They're clearly different. You saw what I did today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm done thinking out loud. Now let me approach Sabrina.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Sabrina.
Hey.
How you been?
Good. Same old, same old.
Right. And the elephant stays in the room.
Yes.
Now, what if I did this?
Mm-hmm.
What if I came to you and said, all right, so I'm not going to do the same word for word thing against thinking out loud, but my approach now.
Okay.
So now I'm actually approaching you. Sabrina, been meaning to talk to you a little bit.
Really? Okay.
So I've never really given you the platform to even tell me that the way I treat you is really fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
So you've never been able to tell me that. And every time that you screamed at me, I've just stood very close to you because I'm bigger and I'm stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked down on you and I said, so what the hell are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. There's a lot more to me than you. Every time you got pissed off, I played that card.
Right.
I put you in an unwinnable position.
Mm-hmm.
I have destroyed your ability to be you.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken away your name. I've taken away your culture. I've taken away everything that is you.
Mm-hmm.
And tried to make you fit a mold that is everything but you.
Right.
I realize that now. And I can tell you I'm sorry, and I am. It's not going to change a goddamn thing I've done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I can go from here.
The sincerity in what you're saying right now makes me as the individual, or we as the community, in receiving that type of response, as we can go somewhere from here, because you're acknowledging that it is challenging on both sides, that it's a relinquishing of whatever power, that it is uncomfortable, but that there is a willingness.
Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I am definitely willing to grow, but you don't owe me anything. And I know that because I am sitting here looking you dead in the eye, telling you, I see what I've done to you. Mm-hmm. I really do. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this for so long that I know what I need to do and what everyone around me is telling me to do. Mm-hmm. I gotta really shape up. Mm-hmm. But my ego won't let me. I have an extraordinary amount of power. I'm the strongest. Mm-hmm. I'm the most powerful. I'm the richest. I'm this. I'm that. I'm everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's tough to let go of that. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm not necessarily saying to let go of that, I feel like I need to let go of it, but I'm not. See, you hear me confused because I don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. I understand your willingness to say we have a place to go from here, but I'm sitting here telling you I don't know how.
Right.
Because there's a limitation to how much I can acknowledge this over and over. And no different than a person trying to recover from alcohol abuse or misuse, whatever. We relapse. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to relapse. And honestly, is there room for you to trust me? I don't blame you. But in order for us to grow, you've got to trust me.
Yes, and that's the scary part.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's break it down a bit. Mm-hmm. I think to forgive, to go back to your question.
Yeah.
And it's not an answer, by the way. Everyone needs to come up with their own fucking answer to this.
Right. We're literally breaking it down in vivo.
Right. And believe it or not, we have not talked about this. She mentioned forgiveness during the break.
Just forgiveness, yeah.
But in order for, I think, forgiveness and healing, and it's not necessarily forgetting.
No.
That saying forgive and forget, let's just put that in the trash can where it belongs.
Right.
But forgiveness, it takes two parties or whoever, whatever amount of parties that are involved in this. Two people have to be very vulnerable.
Yes.
Two people have to come to a very specific space where both, I don't want to keep using the word victim and abuser. I mean, it's the easy place. If we're talking about social injustices, we can stay right with victim and abuser, sure. But if we're talking about more interpersonal or more delicate, like very like one-on-one actual,
it's not that like
with the exception of a very aggressive things. Excuse me. It's never really that black and white.
Right.
It's there's blame to go around for everyone. But if two people can come and become very vulnerable in front of each other and really lay their shit out on the table, including the person who feels that they've been wronged, you have to take up the space being provided for you, assuming that I am really giving you that space, to really tell me what happened. Just take that space. Don't wonder about time. Don't think about any of that crap, and just say, this is how I got hurt, why it hurt, how everything.
Right.
And I have to do the same shit that I've been doing sitting here with you this entire episode. And what I think that I've been doing since I've started this whole platform is active listening.
Yeah.
I have to listen and be empathic and listen to your plight, listen to where you're coming from, not allow my defenses to say, but this is why I did this and this is why I did that. Just shelf it for a minute and just focus on, damn, she went through all that. And after she's done, maybe you and I need to take a little break, take 5 minutes, come back, and I'll be like, I've thought about what you said, but before we address that, this is why I did what I did. This is how I did what I did. This is, you know?
Yep.
And if you can provide me that space, at least there's potential that you and I actually have a place to go from here. And even if it comes irreconcilable differences and we're done, fine. But if anything, you forgive the situation.
Right.
I think, I don't know.
Which potentially could provide you with the opportunity to then use that experience, like I talked about in our last, episode of, I think every experience is a learning
you could grow.
Person. So being able to grow in that experience and being like be able to inform or help you with something else that is to come up in life, because life is life. That would be able to help. Yeah.
It's just difficult because I think it's very easy for us sometimes to point blame. And it's really easy to say, you didn't give me the platform, you didn't give me the space to talk. Sometimes that space is right there for you, but we don't give enough credit to how hard it is to occupy that space. It's easy to give love to all your friends, but the second someone comes up to you and says, oh, wow, Sabrina, you look really nice today. You're like, oh, weird compliments. I feel kind of weird.
Yep.
Why? And I'm not changing the subject. I'm just saying it's similar the way I see it. And that's my perspective on it, is that we're not comfortable with us.
Yeah.
I think forgiveness, to really forgive someone, is to let go of the power that it has over you. For an example.
And I think let go of the power of the storyline you've created.
Bravo. It's all interconnected. So the narrative that you've decided to take in your mind.
Yes.
That story. The tone. Have you ever went to sleep or what's the word? Not what's the word, but have you ever gotten like a little fight with a friend or something?
Yes.
And then you go home, you lay down in bed, that friend is clearly nowhere around. And then you have that conversation in your head that usually sounds like this. oh man, when I see them tomorrow, I'm going to say this. And then when I say this, they're going to say that to me. And if they say this, I'm going to respond this way. But if they say that, I'm going to respond that way.
Absolutely. I've
Right.
had that before going to bed, getting in the shower. I mean, we've all been there, I think.
Right. I think there's a lot of power in approaching that friend and saying, yeah, I'm really sorry to call you at midnight. And I just know that you might sleep a little later.
Yeah.
But I was having this discussion in my head, and it's funny. And I don't know, maybe you're doing the same, maybe you're not. It doesn't really matter. But in my head, I was like, oh, if they say this, I'm going to say that. And, that whole scenario. I just wanted to reach out and tell you what happened today bugged me.
Yeah, because at the core of it really is that whatever the emotion is, that's what's causing
And power and control, what you alluded to earlier, bringing it back to forgiveness. When you forgive someone, you are relinquishing having that upper hand.
And what that means in your mind of what the upper hand is.
Yep.
It's not necessarily an upper hand.
It's not real. It's not real. If you value the relationship, there is no upper hand. Because you either have that relationship or you don't. But more importantly, before you can have that relationship with someone else, don't you have to have some kind of inkling, some kind of relationship with yourself? If you can understand the process of forgiving yourself.
Yes. Hallelujah.
I think it's a lot easier to understand what it's like to forgive someone else.
Correct.
I've been wronged. I've been wronged more times than I can really count. Do I hold any grudges towards any of these people? Zero. And for any of them out there that are listening that I've not spoken to in years, cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm here. And I'm not saying that everyone should feel this way or needs to feel this way. You do you.
Whatever works.
This is just me. I don't care to see these people again because I've chosen to let go of the relationship. There's not mending something like that.
Right.
I just realized oh, no, I had a good relationship with this person or that person, and not intimate only. Friendships, it doesn't matter what it is, just any kind of relationship with another human being, a separate entity. Cheers. The actions that happen, I gave you that space.
Right.
I asked. I tried.
And I trusted in what was presented.
And whatever it is that happened that led to just a splitting, that's a lot to happen too. But do I hold a grudge?
No.
Do I think that they did me wrong? No. They did them. They're allowed to be them.
Right.
And if I decide to judge it as you're wrong or you're bad or you're good, that's based on my value system, though. That's not based on, there's no rule to this.
Yeah. Like no one's value system is set in concrete for everyone to follow.
And that's, again, when we're talking about interpersonal. Going back to forgiveness and using social injustices as an example, I would not say 100%, but I would say a good portion of what I just said really kind of flies out the window. And
it doesn't.
It absolutely doesn't. It completely stands. Because this is the rule of natural law. We're not talking about gravity. And the system and the construct that's set in place is what it is. And the victim will keep fighting. The oppressor, or the abuser, or whatever, whoever's in charge is going to fight to stay in charge at all cost. How does that look like at the end? How does it play out? I don't know. It can change. It really, I believe it can change. It just takes two people representing whatever construct before we approach and sit down across this desk that I swear I will clean at some point. It's just dusty. But before we can sit down and have this conversation, you just first have to be willing to look in the mirror and have a conversation with you.
Yes, that's where it starts.
Always.
In anything. Yep.
So, Where do we go from here?
I don't know. One day at a time.
I think that's how you ended it last time. They didn't hear that, but they're going to hear it today.
Yeah.
All right. And so for real this time.
Yeah.
There are going to be a few more episodes in general before I take a little break to address other stuff in life. And after we come back from that break, I've ended every episode by saying, and I'll go into more detail about this later, but I want you back. I'm going to try to get everyone back that has come on to come on one more time down the road.
Okay.
And to expand on things a bit.
Okay.
Some things we talked about, and plus the world will continue to change.
Or maybe we can have a big powwow.
Hell yeah. Bring some alcohol in here. If that's what you mean. Or 99
or
red
the
balloons.
other individuals that, were part of the other episodes.
Oh, yeah, sure. I don't mind at all. It's not where my head went. I think I don't know. We'll figure out where to go from here. But either way, Sabrina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it was an awesome conversation today. And I look forward to seeing you again at least one more time.
Of course.
All right, you take care.
You too.